Thank you, Chair. So I've also read your speech at Glasgow, and far from being a modest punter looking at it from outside, you are in a quite unique position, having been in the negotiations, knowing the key stakeholders, and knowing what the situation is back at home in the United Kingdom. Just taking you back to page 3 of your speech, which said, like it or not, others universally believe in the indivisibility of the four freedoms. Is it really true that the four freedoms are indivisible?
Well, the economic answer would be that they don't have to be and they shouldn't necessarily be, and that's, incidentally, if you want a sort of academic argument for that, blessed by far better economists than me, look at the Continental Partnership idea that came out from Bruegel in August or September 2016. And they raise exactly that point and say the four freedoms shouldn't be indivisible and there is something different about free movement of people from the others. So I think you can make a reputable economic case. The problem is, as a negotiator, you can make any reputable economic case, and I made several, many over many years for many different prime ministers. The question is, does anybody care? And would anybody agree it? It is indivisibility has become a sacred and totemic thing, certainly within the European Union, and I heard it many times from specific European leaders I won't need to name, and I heard it in person from them. So this idea that it's all just the creation of sort of legal theologians, well, even if it is, leaders spout it and say it. I don't think it's economically terribly well justified or rational, but as I say, as a negotiator, that can be beside the point. I argue this obviously frequently in the Cameron renegotiation to say, you're being far too purist here, and let's look at this from an economically rational perspective. And also saying to people, but you're suffering from a brain drain which pulls out many of your best tertiary educated people from your own economies into our economy. This isn't necessarily a good thing for you either, in the way it's operating. So I don't believe in it as... the question is, why has it become doctrine, and is it economically fully rational? I don't think it's fully economically rational. It has become doctrine, which I think, if you remained as an EU member, you could never crack the kind of indivisibility. I do think, which is why I'm tentatively raising it in the Glasgow lecture, I do think there's a question, especially if you're blocked on this Irish question, if we're really saying that the only way through an Irish question for the other side is what Barnier's put on the table, and the only way through the Irish issue from the British side is what we've put on the table, then we're never going to meet. And there's never going to be an agreement, because I can assure you, I believe that the others will say the backstop is key, and the backstop has to be permanent, not time limited, and we don't believe in either of your options, either max fac or new customs partnership. So I was cudgelling my brains as an outsider, but ex-insider, thinking, okay, put all that together. Is there a potential solution set here which indeed tramples a bit on the sanctity of the four freedoms, but is potentially a palatable outcome for France, Germany, and other key players on the other side of the table, and potentially for us?
Just two points from that. Page 24 talks about the customs union, and I can come back to that in a minute. But some say we can have a deep and special partnership with the EU without some measure of free movement for EU nationals. Would you agree with that?
Well, it depends what you mean by deep and special. As soon as you get into the business of saying we don't accept supranational law, supranational jurisdiction of any sort, which was certainly where we started in October 16, then others say, well, you're not part of the legal architecture and ecosystem anymore, and therefore there can't be a deep and special partnership which looks remotely like the one that you're describing. So if you want the caricature of the British position from the other side of the table, if I can give it briefly to you, it's basically that now the Brits are going through the process of working out what they liked about EU membership. They're demanding all kinds of things that they used to like about EU membership on exactly unchanged terms, but without accepting the supranational jurisdiction. And that's never going to run. And I'm afraid it is never going to run. You're never going to get France, Germany or others to agree that, because that is basically most of the benefits of single market membership, but none of the costs and none of the obligations. So they're obviously not going to agree that. I can tell you now, I mean, the Mansion House kind of ambitious managed divergence, they're obviously not going to agree that.
So it all comes down to what do we mean by special and deep partnership?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a final question, if I may. On page 24, you say the customs union alone does not serve either the Irish or the regulatory goods and services sector, and you just mentioned MaxFac and the hybrid model.
Yeah.
From the two that have been put forward so far, which would you say is more likely to address those issues?
Well, MaxFac doesn't solve the problem as others see it, so they don't understand why MaxFac is on the table at all, because however, as I put it really there, however facilitated the border, it's still a border and it's still demonstrably different from what we've got now. So I don't think he'll ever get MaxFac agreed, personally. And, you know, I won't quote all the sources that I have who told me that, but I don't think that's right. The new customs partnership, look, it sounds Sir Humphrey-esque to say it, it's a brave idea. It's complex, to put it mildly. It's extremely... we don't know whether the technology could be devised. It certainly doesn't exist at the moment. It involves us operating as a third country power, policing the external border of the European Union, and then an extraordinarily elaborate machinery for remitting back to importers the difference between what our tariff rates have become once we use our sovereign trade policy and what the EU... Look, if you were confronted with that from the other side of the table, and this were Europeans putting that to us and saying, could we, you know, have police your external border of your external customs union and operate that, you know, I mean, I think I can imagine what the UK system's answer would be. So I'm not saying this is wholly inconceivable, but I do know, and it's been widely reported in our press, that 5 or 6 key questions were asked of the UK side. Because the UK put this proposition on paper for the first time in August 2017. To the best of my knowledge, there's been nothing since on paper from the UK. The other side directed 5 killer questions at it in terms of kind of how it would operate, and I allude to some of them. And I don't think they feel they've had any answer from the UK authorities as to how this would be made to work. And then there's a question of, is it just a matter of technology and time? In other words, could they in principle, after a long process in which they've had involvement, agree this from a date, January 2023 or whatever? Or are they saying, in principle, no, we're not prepared to allow a third country power to negotiate, to police our external border, collect our duties for us, which is, after all, it's their duties for the EU budget. We're not prepared to do that on principle, it's no dice. If they're in that position and saying neither MaxFac nor New Customs Partnership is a runner, then, you know, you don't need to be in my shoes to think, you know, we're heading for a major crunch.